I'm gonna keep the tradition going with the water claps. I love it, so let's start. We gotta stay hydrated here, Gotta love that. How many musicians do we have? People who play, dabble with guitar or piano? Okay, quite a few. There's always that fun overlap of tech people and musicians, which I really like. I dabble myself. That was a lot of the inspiration for my talk title, and there'll be some themes to music throughout the talk as well too. So for the next 20 minutes, I really want to talk about how React's latest features work across the client and the server. And it's not about just the client or just the server, but really the combination of the two and how this architecture fits together. You can't have the rhythm without the blues, the drum without the bass, and I'll make a couple more music references. But hi, I'm Lee, or Lee Rob online. I love teaching developers how to build for the web with React. And I just like building great developer products. A bit more about myself. This is me and my wife, Allie. We have 2 cats, Fiona and Lucy, and I work at Vercel on Next.js. Wait, where did that come from? Who's that guy? That's me and Ryan yesterday repping the remix gear, but yeah, I work at Vercel on Next.js, which is what I'm gonna talk a little bit about today as well too. Now, I live in Iowa, which is not Idaho with the potatoes, and it's also not Ohio with Ricky as well. It's it's right there in the middle of the United States. If you've heard of Field of Dreams, it's that. We have the cornfields, and that's an AI-generated image, but it does actually exist. In reality, there's just like data centers everywhere in Iowa, so that kind of makes sense as well too. I'm really fortunate and thankful to be on this stage. I've looked up to so many of the past speakers here, many of you all for over a decade, and really just honored to be here. I want to pick on 2 past speakers in particular that I'm fortunate to get to work with. Who's that Pokemon? Does anyone recognize this guy? I don't know who he is without the mustache, but Guillermo here. Another one, I don't know, with this iconic pose. Who is this man? Damo, some of the past React Comp speakers. So yeah, very excited to be here. In my talk, I'm going to be building this chat widget, this intercom-like example that talks to an AI model and helps you answer your questions. Kind of simple example, but we're going to make our way through just a basic React app all the way to using some of the latest features. And React's about helping you build great user interfaces, and that means the client and the server. Some of those things happen on my device, in the browser. Some of those things happen on a different computer. I loved Dan's talk the other day. And those 2 different computers, those 2 different programs really have to work together. Sometimes that's running on a data center in Iowa somewhere, and sometimes that's happening ahead of time, or it's happening at runtime, and we're gonna get into some of those nuances as well today. So first, let's go back 10 years to the beginnings of React, and we're gonna start with the introduction to our song here. I wanna start by just recapping some of the React design principles there's quite a few, but these are some of the ones that I really liked. So with incremental adoption, you should just be able to start using React and not have to really rewrite your whole application. I really liked Ryan's talk the other day as well too. Composability, like if I have a bunch of different React engineers working across many different teams, I should be able to build a component and drop it in and not have it affect the rest of my application. Components written by different people should work together well, and that's really what React does well with composability. And the final one that's probably one of my favorite ones is trying to find the common abstraction. React has done a really good job about having this kind of minimal surface area and allowing things to be developed and built in user land and user code, and then eventually finding these common abstractions that really raise the ceiling of the type of user experiences that you can build. So definitely want to touch back on some of these design principles as we move through. So let's take a look at the code. We'll switch back and forth here. See if this works. There we go. Okay, so on my left, I have a server template. I have HTML, just some basic HTML, and on the right, I have my browser, and I have this chat widget going here, so I can say, hi, and this is gonna talk to my model. I'm a helpful assistant, here to make your life easier. And you'll notice that on the left in the HTML, I've got the messages that I'm returning back, the text area, the button. But then I need to make this interactive. I want to chat with this widget. So I have a script tag. And this is just going to use some vanilla JavaScript here. Not jQuery, although we could do jQuery. we're just going to do some vanilla JavaScript. So I have some events, I have some event listeners for clicks and key presses, and then I have a function that goes over the network. It talks to my AI model, returns the results back, and adds it to that list of messages. So pretty straightforward. You can continue building apps like this today if you want. There's nothing wrong with this. This is still a great way of doing it. But 10 years ago, a lot of folks thought, I kind of want to make this a little bit more declarative. I would love to encapsulate some of this in these reusable components and make it easy to drop them in my application without affecting any other logic anywhere else. So you might wonder what this looks like as a React component. So your HTML might look a little bit differently. You might have this root element that you're putting the React component into, and then you kind of compile this into still a script tag that's running in the browser. So let me go over to here. We'll go to the React version. It's going to work the same way. Functionally, it's the same thing, but we're able to express this in this encapsulated component called a chat widget. We have some state, we have some effects here for focusing on the input or being able to submit the form when I press the enter key, and then we still have that function that allows us to send a message, go over the network, and talk to our model. But there's one big difference here, which is that the HTML is in the JavaScript, right? We have our JSX here, and we're able to put all this together, both the logic that determines what UI we show, as well as the UI itself. Now, 10 years ago, this was class components. I think we also still remember those. But I kept it with hooks just to make it a little bit easier to write. But this is really how we got started building React applications. And it's still a great way of taking advantage of the client today. So I wanted to show that first. But then I want to talk a little bit about how the ecosystem has evolved over time. So let's move a little bit forward past the start and kind of into the chorus of our song here. What's happened since then? What's it been like for the last 10 years of React? Well, we had quite a bit of exploration. I mentioned that React has this minimal API surface area, and it's allowed the community to take that and create and extend and build all these amazing primitives and libraries and frameworks on top of these really amazing core primitives. And I really like this visualization of how things have evolved over time, especially because, as we'll talk about today, we don't know what's going to happen next. We want to see what everyone builds with all of these powerful new tools. So I want to talk about a couple main categories of exploration in the ecosystem. And let's start with routing. So going back 10 years ago, React Router was introduced or talked at React Conf here. And it was really one of the first solutions that gave this declarative way of defining the routes in your components. And there's been a ton of exploration in routing since, and still, this is a really powerful pattern to build off of. The second one, a big kind of category of community exploration, is data fetching. So in 2016, Next.js came out with this server-rendered React framework that took the React component model and it extended it to be able to have this function called getInitialProps that allowed you to do data fetching. And not only could those data fetching functions be placed in your components, they could also be prefetched ahead of time to try to give you the best benefits of a server-rendered React application, but that snappy SPA-like feel when you move between pages that we all love from React as well too. And then on the right, other frameworks like Remix have came and evolved and added some additional things to this as well too, like streaming with defer and actions to simplify forms. So we've seen just a ton of exploration in this space as well too. And the last category I'll talk about is just broadly like caching and invalidation. There's been a number of libraries here, React Query or Tanstack Query, SWR, Apollo, like lots of libraries that have made it easy to co-locate your data fetching with your component. You want to put that logic next to the UI that it creates. And I think Tanstack Query has done a good job of defining your cache keys easier, doing patterns like infinite scroll or pagination or retrying fetches. Like, there's a lot that goes into this, and I think I'm really proud of a lot of the libraries in the community that have pushed this forward. So let's push a little bit forward towards the outro of this song. We've heard a lot about React 19 and a lot of this new functionality across the client and the server. If we take those original React design principles and we apply them to today, what would that look like? What would that chatbot look like? Well, let's go back to the code. And OK, so I also have a Next.js application running that I'm going to pull up. And what I've done is I've taken that client-side React component that I was building from before, and I've dropped it into a server framework. And we're going to start just only talking about client features, but then we'll make our way to some of these newer React 19 features that we've talked about. So let's start with this first page. Now, what you're going to notice is it's pretty much the same as before, but I've made kind of two big changes. One, I moved from a controlled component to an uncontrolled form here. So I'm just reading the value in. I'm updating the state with the messages that I have, and then I have this client action. I have this asynchronous transition. I'm still going over the network. I'm making a fetch out to my AI model. I'm getting the result back, and I'm updating the state. This allows me to do that work in the background, and then when it's done, I can update my UI without having to block any of that UI. So let's check and make sure this works. What is React? Hey, there we go. It still works. Awesome. Okay, so we can still talk to our AI model. That's great. We made some progress here, but you know, it'd be great if I could disable the button while that state is pending so I don't spam that button and click it multiple times. Well, luckily I have this transition and it has this pending flag that I can use. So, you know, I can just go down to here and I can throw on disabled and say if it's pending, then, you know, we can just disable that. So that's great. But still, you know, this is a little verbose. I had to manually define my transition, and the form didn't reset. I want to clear out that input after I submit that. So how can we make this a little bit better? Well, let's go to another version of this, and let's talk through a couple small changes I've made. So we'll start on line 27 here with this form. I'm now using this action, and what you'll notice, I've taken that client action, I've moved it up into use action state. And it allowed me to simplify a couple things. One, I don't have to define that transition manually anymore. It's doing that for me. And it's automatically going to reset the form for me as well, too. So that's pretty nice. I get access to the form data. Again, still going over the network, get the result back, and then I update React state. Now, you can store state and use action state, and right now I'm not using that. Maybe we can make that a little bit better in the future as well, too. I have the state, the action, and again, I can still use the pending flag from this transition to disable that button. So let's see if this works. What is JavaScript? This is just forcing you to clap for my demos. It's great. No, just kidding. So this is a little bit better. We've reduced some of that boilerplate code, but I feel like there's a way that we can streamline this even more. So let's do another version of this. Let's simplify this a little bit more. Okay. Now in this version, let's focus in specifically inside of the action. So we still get the form data message, but you'll notice now we're not going over the network anymore to a fetch to some separate API somewhere else that's talking to that large language model. Instead, we're just calling a function. And we're calling this function that's a server action. And this send chat function is being imported up here at the top. And it's telling my bundler, hey, we're going to make a portal into the server world. We're going to be able to call this function and go from client to server. So let's take a little detour into this function. At the top, we have that directive for our bundler, use server, and then we have this function, send chat, that's doing the heavy lifting of talking to our large language model. This is using Llama 3, the 8 billion parameter model. Thank you, Meta, for Llama 3. It's great. Yes, and we get the result back, and then we return it back. So I didn't have to manually create an API endpoint anywhere. I didn't have to have a separate service. I could just build this kind of full stack app with the single unified React programming model. So that's really handy. Let's make sure this still works. Yeah, yes, it still works. Okay, now I want to mention something though while we're here, which is I didn't have to manually write the API endpoint, but does it still exist? And the answer is yes, it does still exist, and I can demonstrate that really well. I'm just going to copy this curl, and we're going to open up the terminal here. We'll make a new tab, make this a little bit bigger. So if I post back to this route, and I include this header for an ID for the action, what you're going to see is that I can still call this directly. So it is still an API. I just don't have to kind of manually spin it up myself. The reason why I wanted to mention this is because the best practices for building APIs still apply. We still want to have a data access layer. So you still want to have your authentication, your authorization checks as part of this as well, too. It doesn't remove you from thinking about that as well, too. So just wanted to quickly quickly mention that as well. Okay, let's go back to our chat component. So we talked about this line, but there's a couple other changes here. I updated the state, that use action state, to hold the messages that I get back from my large language model. So not only do I set some initial messages or some initial state, but then in my action here, I return and kind of merge the old state with what I get back from the server. Now, you might have noticed that when you opened up this chat widget, there was some new information here. All of a sudden, my chat widget knew who I was. It said, welcome, Lee Rob. How may I help you today? So how's that possible? Where did that information come from? A server had to go fetch that information about my user and forward it to the client so that I can use it in this component. And if you look at my component here, this chat widget, it doesn't know where the user came from. It just has this prop that was passed to it from the server, and then I can use that user information to construct the message. So let's go up the tree one level here, and let's look at that server component that helped us get that information. So going back to finding that common abstraction, what would it look like in a React model to be able to fetch data? Well, I think it makes sense to just mark a function as async and just await some data. I think that sounds like a pretty helpful way of doing this. So I go talk to an API, I get some information back about my user, and then the server component can take that info, it can serialize it and pass it to my client component. So that's where this component is being used. So I think that's really powerful. And it really simplifies the pieces that I need to be able to put this together. Yet I'm still left feeling like maybe we could take this just a little bit further. Now, one of those React design principles was composability. And really everything we've talked about thus far has been able to compose together. So you might imagine a world where you could take something off the shelf, like a next generation of UI component libraries or React libraries, that make it really easy to build these type of experiences. So maybe if I just delete all this code and export default function page, and I might imagine I could just do like, I don't know, chat with user or something like that. Something like this, maybe Lee Rob. Yeah, something like that might work, I guess. Let me just see if this works. What is React? Wait, that works? What if I told you that package was real? I published this package. It's a demo. Don't put this in production, please. But I published this package that actually takes everything that I just showed today, server components, client components, server actions, all that good stuff, and it all composes together in one component. And maybe I want to change this, and we're going to have a different user now. It's that easy. So you can imagine this next generation of components built this way. I get really excited about it. I think it's going to be, it's going to be great. Let me go back to my slides. Okay, to help visualize that a little bit, I built this little diagram. So I had that page, that server component. It was going to the client. It was talking to the chat component. That was creating a portal back to the server to call that server action. And it was all communicating with these third parties, a database or an AI provider in this instance. And it's all encapsulated in this chat with user component. I think that's great. So we're at the end of our song. But actually, it's kind of the extended cut 10-minute version, Taylor's version. We've got 10 more minutes, 10 more years of this to come. And I'm really excited about what comes next. To kind of make this more real, I wanted to talk about a Next.js and Vercel customer who's building something like this. This company called Chatbase. They built this MVP with all of these new React features in 2 months, and they're already at $3.5 million ARR, which is just incredible, so kudos to that team. But you can imagine this next generation of these components that are really interactive and allow you to take the best parts of both the client and the server. And like we saw yesterday with Evan's talk as well too, there's so much potential here. Just to kind of show the art of what is possible here, something we've been spending a lot of time thinking about is how all of the things I've just talked about so far can help us define the next generation of user interfaces when we're building with some of these powerful large language models. So you might imagine maybe I'm building a United Airlines support app, and maybe I want to do something like, tell me all the flights to Rome today, and I want to have this interactive widget that I can click on and choose the flight that works best for me. Then maybe I want to have this interactive seat picker, where I can choose the best seat. I can integrate with third parties like Google Pay or Stripe or your favorite payments provider and connect to those APIs, again, across the client and the server. And then I get a boarding pass back for my flight. All of this is possible. This is a real demo, by the way, gemini.vercel.ai. All of this is possible thanks to the work of the React team at Meta and all the innovations over the last 10 years that build on top of each other, all the concurrent features, streaming, server rendering. It's just really exciting to see it all come together in something like this. And I can't wait to see the next generation of components and packages built on all of this technology. So thank you very much.